Everyone believed the plantation owner's daughter had been born completely blind. For years, no one questioned it. Not the doctors, not the house staff, not even her own father. She lived in silence, tucked away inside a grand southern estate, hidden from the world in a mansion full of secrets and sorrow. But everything changed the day a new slave girl was assigned to the house. She wasn't a doctor or a healer, just a quiet young girl who paid attention. What she noticed during her quiet work inside Willowridge would unravel years of lies, shake the very walls of the plantation, and bring to light a truth buried since the day the little girl was born. What started as forced labor became a mission. And what she uncovered would shock everyone, especially the man who thought he had done everything to protect his only child. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. In the heart of Virginia, in the year 1841, stood Willowridge Plantation, a large and quiet place surrounded by cotton fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The mansion at its center was grand but carried a deep stillness, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Owned by Master Jeremiah Willowridge, a tall, serious man with a graying beard and cold eyes, the house had become a place of silence and sorrow. Jeremiah had once been known as a man full of strength and command, but all of that had changed after his wife, Margaret, died giving birth to their only child. Since that day, the once lively house had turned cold. The laughter and music were gone. Servants walked carefully, whispering when they spoke, and no one dared make too much noise. The house now lived by the rhythms of grief, and its center was the little girl. Eleanor Willowridge, whom everyone called Ellie, was the daughter born on the same night her mother passed away. She was small, pale, and always quiet. The doctor who helped deliver her, a man named Dr. Whitaker, had declared her blind soon after birth. He said she had no light in her eyes, no response to movement, and would never see the world around her. Master Jeremiah had accepted this news with a heavy heart, retreating even further from those around him. He poured all his energy into protecting the child. He rarely left the plantation and would not allow strangers near the house. Even the other slaves, unless assigned to the mansion, hardly ever saw the girl. Ellie was raised in quiet rooms with heavy curtains and soft steps. She didn't run, she didn't laugh, and she never looked directly at anyone. Her face was always still, and her gaze fixed on something no one else could see. The slaves on the plantation spoke little of Miss Ellie, except in hushed tones when they gathered in the quarters at night. Some said she was touched by spirits, others whispered that the house itself had taken her soul when her mother died. But they all agreed on one thing: Willowridge was not what it used to be. The cotton still grew, the work still happened, but something heavy hung in the air. When the house needed cleaning, only the most trusted hands were sent inside. That is how Addie came to be there. She was 16, quiet, and recently brought from a nearby estate after her mother was sold off. She had large eyes that seemed to notice everything, though she never spoke unless spoken to. The mistress who had owned her before had described her as too soft to break, but too smart to leave in the field. And so, she was sent to the house. Addie's first days at Willowridge were full of quiet observation. She was shown the chores by an older house slave named Hester, who had been working for the Willowridge family for years. Hester warned her to stay out of the master's way and to never speak unless asked. "This house got ears," she said, "and they don't like noise." Addie nodded and kept her head down, but she could not help but notice the strange stillness in the mansion. There were rooms filled with fine furniture covered in dust cloths, and long hallways where sunlight struggled to reach. The only room that seemed alive was the one at the end of the upstairs hall, where Ellie stayed. Addie saw her for the first time on her third day, sitting on a rug near the window with a small worn-out doll in her hands. Her dress was clean, her hair brushed, but her face looked like it belonged to a porcelain doll, beautiful but blank. She didn't speak when Addie entered. She didn't even move. But something about her made Addie slow her steps. There was a feeling in the room, like walking into a dream that wasn't quite right. Addie placed the folded linens on the chair and quietly began to dust the nearby shelves. She watched Ellie from the corner of her eye, curious but cautious. Ellie sat very still, her eyes open but unfocused. They didn't follow sound or motion. Yet, as Addie moved across the room, she thought she saw Ellie's head tilt slightly. Just for a second. Addie froze, waiting to see if she would do it again, but Ellie stayed still. Addie told herself it was nothing, just her imagination. Still, something stayed in her mind about that moment. She had been around children before, blind and otherwise. Something about this child didn't feel like the others. She wasn't just blind. She was closed off, hidden, like a door that had been locked from the inside. Each day after that, Addie found herself near Ellie more often. She didn't try to talk to her or make her play. She simply cleaned, folded, and moved quietly around the room. But she watched. And in her watching, she noticed little things. The way Ellie's fingers played with the edges of her dress when light poured through the window. The way her eyes sometimes shifted when a shadow moved across the floor. These were not big reactions, not enough for anyone else to notice. But Addie saw them. She remembered them. She began to wonder how a girl who was completely blind could respond to things she wasn't supposed to see. She asked herself again and again, careful not to let her thoughts show on her face. She knew better than to speak her mind in a house like this. But she also knew how to listen, and more importantly, how to see what others ignored. Master Jeremiah, though quiet and distant, still walked the halls of Willowridge. He often stood outside Ellie's room, listening to her breathing through the door. Sometimes he would go in and sit beside her, reading from books or humming songs his wife once sang. Addie once saw him through a crack in the door, sitting stiffly in a chair while Ellie lay on the bed, her eyes to the ceiling. His face was hard, but his voice was gentle, and in those moments, he looked like a man trapped in a memory. Addie didn't know if he truly saw his daughter as she was, or as he wished her to be. But one thing was certain, he loved her deeply. Even if that love was wrapped in sadness. Even if it made him blind in his own way. And perhaps that was why no one ever questioned the doctor's word or dared to look for a different answer. Dr. Whitaker visited the plantation once a month. He was a tall, thin man with cold hands and a sharp smell of medicine. Every visit was the same. He would go into Ellie's room with a small black bag and stay behind closed doors for a while. No one knew what he did in there, but when he left, he always said the same thing. No change. Her condition remains. Keep her comfortable. Jeremiah would nod, thank him, and return to his silence. Addie watched this from the shadows, her hands always busy, her ears always open. One morning, she saw Hester give Ellie a few drops from a small brown bottle, whispering, "Doctor said it'd help her rest." But the way the girl's body slumped afterward made Addie wonder what kind of rest that truly was. She stored the image away in her mind, like a puzzle piece waiting for the others. That night, in the small slave quarters behind the house, Addie lay awake on her straw bed thinking about Ellie. The other girls talked softly about chores and gossip, but Addie kept to herself, her thoughts swirling like wind through the trees. Something wasn't right. She didn't have proof, and she didn't dare speak it out loud. But the way Ellie moved sometimes, the way her face turned toward the light, it made Addie feel like the story they all believed wasn't true. She wondered if Ellie's blindness was real, or if someone had decided it was and never looked again. Maybe they were all too sad to ask. Maybe it was easier to believe she couldn't see, so no one had to look her in the eyes and tell her the truth. As Addie drifted to sleep, one thought stayed with her. What if she can see? What if no one ever gave her the chance? The next day, Addie moved carefully through her chores, thinking more than ever before. She paid close attention to the way light came into the house, how it shifted across the floor, how it touched Ellie's skin. She noticed how Ellie's eyes blinked a little faster in the morning than at night. She noticed how she seemed calmer when sitting near the window than in the darker parts of the room. Addie began to position things just so, placing a vase where the light might catch it, laying a white cloth on a dark table near where Ellie sat. None of it was bold. Nothing that could get her in trouble. But she was testing. watching, waiting. If there was something hidden behind those quiet eyes, Addie was going to find it. She didn't know what she would do with the truth if she found it, but she knew she wouldn't ignore it. Not like everyone else had. Willowridge continued its slow days, its heavy silence, and its quiet pain. But deep inside its walls, in a room filled with soft whispers and forgotten songs, something had begun to stir. A young girl born into silence was being watched by another who knew the weight of quiet. One carried the burden of being blind. The other carried the burden of being unseen. And between them, though no words had yet been shared, a thread of understanding had begun to form. Addie didn't yet know what the future would bring. But in the shadow of that great house, she had seen something others had missed. She had seen the way Ellie tilted her head. She had seen her blink. And for the first time since arriving at Willowridge, Addie felt like she was meant to be there, not just to clean and serve, but to find the truth hidden behind blind eyes. The days at Willowridge moved slowly, like a heavy wind that never changed direction. Addie now rose before the sun, her bare feet padding across the wooden floors of the house with quiet care. Her hands had learned the shape of every curtain, every stair, every room that needed dusting or sweeping. She no longer needed to ask where things belonged or what was expected of her. The mansion's quiet rules had become part of her body. The other house slaves kept their distance. They were polite, but not friendly. Addie had learned quickly that everyone here moved through their days like shadows, always watching but never speaking too much. Even Hester, who had first shown her around, only spoke in short sentences now. Don't stare. Don't ask questions. Don't touch what don't belong to you. It wasn't cruelty. It was fear. A fear that had lived in the house longer than Addie had. The mansion remained silent most of the time. The only sounds were the slow ticking of the hallway clock and the creaks of the wooden floors as people passed quietly. Addie often worked near the upstairs rooms, where Miss Ellie spent most of her day. Ellie still said nothing. She still sat near the window, clutching her doll or running her fingers across the fabric of her dress. She didn't look at anyone and didn't respond to noise. But Addie had begun to pay close attention to the smallest things. Sometimes, when sunlight poured through the long window and painted lines across the floor, she noticed Ellie's head turn just slightly, as if following the warmth. Other times, when a curtain moved in the breeze, she saw Ellie's fingers twitch. These things didn't happen often, and they never lasted long, but Addie noticed every single one. And she started keeping them inside her mind like pieces of a puzzle. The other slaves who worked in the fields or helped in the kitchen rarely saw Ellie, but that didn't stop them from talking about her. At night, when Addie passed by the quarters, she heard their whispers. "That girl ain't right," someone muttered once. She cursed, just like her mama was. Another voice said, "House been quiet since she come, like the dead walk them halls." Addie didn't join in. She didn't believe in curses the same way the others did. She believed in what she saw with her own eyes, and what she saw in Ellie didn't feel like a curse. It felt like something else. Something hidden. She began to watch more carefully, studying how Ellie sat, how her shoulders moved, and how her fingers reached ever so slightly toward the streaks of sunlight that slid across the floorboards. The more she looked, the more she saw things no one else seemed to notice. One day, while dusting the edge of a bookshelf, Addie knocked a small book off the shelf. It hit the ground with a soft thud. Ellie's head moved, just a flick, barely a motion. But it was there. Addie knelt down slowly to pick up the book, her heart beating fast. She didn't say a word. She didn't even breathe loudly. She simply watched Ellie from the corner of her eye. The girl had already returned to stillness, her eyes blank, her lips unmoving. Addie finished her cleaning and left the room without saying anything. That night, she lay awake thinking about it. If Ellie had truly been blind from birth, why did she turn her head when the book fell? Why did her fingers dance toward moving light? Why did her face shift when someone passed by the window? These were not the reactions of someone trapped in total darkness. Addie had seen blind children before. This was different. As the days passed, Addie started adjusting how she worked. She moved slower in Ellie's room, testing how the girl reacted to different sounds. She rustled curtains softly. She tapped on wood with her knuckles. She let her fingers brush against metal trays and watched to see if Ellie moved. And sometimes she did. Always small movements. Never enough to make others believe. But Addie saw them. She kept them inside her like secrets. She knew she had to be careful. If she made a mistake, if she drew too much attention, she could be whipped or worse. So she stayed quiet. She did her chores. She smiled when needed, but her eyes never stopped watching. There was something going on with Miss Ellie, and Addie was beginning to feel sure that what the doctor had said was not the whole truth. The house might be filled with silence, but that silence was hiding something. One afternoon, Addie was polishing the silver in the hallway just outside Ellie's room when she noticed the door slightly open. Inside, Ellie sat by the window as usual. A breeze had pushed the curtain aside, and sunlight was spilling across her lap. Her fingers were moving slowly along the edge of the fabric, tracing the edge where shadow met light. Addie leaned forward slightly, just enough to see without being seen. Ellie lifted her hand and held it up to the light, letting the sun touch her palm. Her face stayed expressionless, but her hand moved, as if trying to catch the warmth. Addie felt a chill run down her spine. Blind or not, Ellie was responding to light. That was something Addie could not deny anymore. She backed away from the door and returned to her polishing, her hands shaking slightly. Her thoughts were loud, but her face stayed calm. That night, Addie snuck away to speak to Mama Roo. Mama Roo was the oldest slave on the plantation, a quiet woman who stayed mostly in the herb garden behind the quarters. She was known for her healing knowledge and her stories, though she rarely talked much anymore. Addie found her sorting dried leaves in a small wooden bowl. She waited until the older woman looked up before speaking. "Miss Ellie, you ever seen her follow light?" Mama Roo narrowed her eyes and didn't answer at first. Addie pressed on softly. "Sometimes I see her hand move to where the sun is, or she turn her head to a sound. I don't think she all the way blind." Mama Roo's hand stopped moving. She looked around, then said low and slow, "Don't say that where ears can hear, child. This house done swallowed truth before. Best be sure what you say before it eats you too." Addie nodded, but didn't back away. Mama Roo looked at her carefully for a long moment before speaking again. "When that girl was born, the house near fell to ruin from grief. Master lost his wife, and with her gone, he held tight to whatever he had left. Doctor said the baby was blind, and the master believed him. Never once asked again. But I saw that child reach for things when she was still in the crib. I told Hester once. She told me never to bring it up again." Addie's heart beat faster. Why would they say she blind if she not? Mama Roo shook her head. Sometimes pain make people blind to what they don't want to see. And sometimes, the truth too heavy to carry. That house been sick a long time, girl. Be careful where you go poking for answers. The warning stayed with Addie as she returned to the house. She didn't sleep much that night. Her mind was filled with images of Ellie tracing light, turning her head, moving her fingers in ways that didn't match the story told about her. Addie knew now she wasn't just imagining things. She also knew the truth could be dangerous. But her heart would not let it go. She had lost her own mother not long before coming to Willowridge, and something about Ellie's silence reminded her of those long empty nights without a voice to hold on to. Maybe that's why she noticed Ellie when others didn't. Maybe sorrow could recognize sorrow. And maybe a girl who had lost everything could still find purpose by protecting someone who had never been given a chance to speak. The next morning, Addie entered Ellie's room with a fresh pitcher of water and a cloth. Ellie was sitting by the window again, as always. But this time, Addie moved more slowly, stepping into the patch of sunlight that stretched across the floor. As she passed by, she noticed Ellie's eyes shift, just slightly. Not her head. Just her eyes. Addie felt her breath catch. She said nothing. She placed the pitcher on the table and began wiping the windowsill. She let the cloth fall to the floor on purpose and bent to pick it up, watching Ellie as she did. Ellie's fingers twitched, and she tilted her head. Addie stood slowly, her heart thudding like a drum. These small movements were beginning to tell a bigger story. She was sure of it now. Ellie wasn't as blind as everyone thought. Maybe she wasn't blind at all. Over the next few days, Addie became more intentional in her chores. She used white cloth instead of dark ones near Ellie. She polished the windows to let in more light. She placed a silver bowl where sunlight would reflect off it. Each time, she watched Ellie carefully. And each time, Ellie responded. Her fingers would twitch. Her eyes would blink faster. Her head would tilt slightly. Addie said nothing. She dared not tell anyone, not even Mama Roo again. But she kept observing, memorizing every sign. The silence between them was no longer just empty space. It was filled with meaning, like words unspoken but deeply understood. Addie didn't know what she would do yet. She didn't have a plan. But she knew one thing: the truth was living in that room. And it was waiting for someone brave enough to see it. Someone who had lived in darkness, but had never stopped looking for the light. Addie moved through the mansion with new purpose now, even if her steps remained slow and quiet. Every day she grew more certain that Ellie could see something, light, motion, maybe even shapes. But it was still hard to know just how much. She didn't want to be wrong. One mistake in a house like Willowridge could bring pain or worse. So she began to plan small tests, things no one else would notice. She started changing how she placed objects in the room. One morning, she put a bright blue cloth on the table instead of a dull brown one. Ellie didn't speak or move, but her eyes blinked more often than usual when the light hit it. Another day, Addie dropped a silver spoon on purpose. It made a soft clink on the floor. Ellie's head turned, ever so slightly. It was enough to keep Addie going. She kept watching. She kept testing. There was a rhythm to the household, and Addie had learned to move with it. She timed her steps with the creaks in the floor. She learned which chores gave her time near Ellie and which ones pulled her away. She also learned something else. Each morning before breakfast, one of the older house slaves named Dorcas would take a small bottle from the top kitchen shelf and carry it upstairs. Addie noticed this first by accident. She had been wiping the lower counters when Dorcas walked past with a cloth-wrapped bottle in hand. Addie didn't ask questions. She just watched. A few minutes later, she saw Dorcas come back down with the same cloth, now empty. The next morning, the same thing happened. Addie began keeping track. Day after day, the pattern stayed the same. Dorcas always went up before Ellie was dressed and ready for the day. She always came back with nothing in her hands. Addie didn't have to guess long. One morning she followed behind Dorcas quietly, keeping a few steps between them. She stopped at the foot of the stairs and listened. She heard the door to Ellie's room open, then soft footsteps inside. A few minutes later, Dorcas came back down, wiping her hands on her apron. Addie returned to the kitchen and waited. When Dorcas stepped outside to fetch water, Addie moved quickly. She reached up to the top shelf where the cloth had been kept and found a small, round bottle hidden behind a sack of flour. It was brown glass with no clear label, only a faint scratch where something had once been written. Addie turned it in her hand, her fingers trembling. The bottle smelled faintly bitter, like roots soaked too long in water. She put it back exactly where it had been, then stepped away before anyone could see. Later that day, Addie brought water to Mama Roo's garden, her mind heavy with questions. Mama Roo was kneeling beside her herbs, sorting through small leaves with steady hands. Addie waited until they were alone before speaking. "You ever hear of a bottle in the kitchen, small and brown? Dorcas takes it up every morning." Mama Roo didn't look up, but her hands slowed. "What kind of bottle?" Addie described it as best as she could. The old woman's eyes narrowed. That sound like one of them tonics the doctor used to mix himself. I seen bottles like that before, back when I worked in town. Some of them were for coughs. Others, well, they wasn't meant for healing at all. Addie swallowed hard. You think it got something to do with Miss Ellie? Mama Roo stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. I told you before, child. That girl's been under strange care since the day she was born. Addie followed Mama Roo to the shade of a fig tree behind the garden. The older woman sat on a stool and motioned for Addie to sit on the ground. Her voice lowered to a whisper. Dr. Whitaker come around here a long time. Back when Master's wife was still alive. After she passed, he kept coming, always with his little black bag. Said the baby couldn't see, said she needed special care. But I remember one day, he dropped a bottle by mistake. I picked it up for him, and the label said something like belladonna extract. I didn't know much then, but I asked around later. That stuff can blind a man if you use too much. He never brought that bottle again, but I never forgot the name. Addie's eyes widened. She had heard of belladonna before, whispered about in stories. You think he'd been using it on Miss Ellie all this time? Mama Roo didn't answer right away. She looked out toward the fields, then back at Addie. I don't know what he do now, but I know what he did then. And I know the eyes don't lie. You say she follow light, she move her hand to the sun? Then she ain't fully blind. Not unless someone made her that way. Addie felt her chest tighten. The weight of her thoughts was heavier now. If what Mama Roo said was true, then Miss Ellie hadn't been born blind at all. She had been made blind, or kept that way on purpose. But why? And who would do such a thing to a child? Addie stood and dusted off her dress. She looked at Mama Roo. Thank you. The old woman nodded, her eyes serious. Be careful, Addie. Some truth heavy enough to crush your back if you carry it alone. And Willowridge don't take kindly to noise. The warning followed Addie like a shadow. Back in the house, everything looked the same. Master Jeremiah walked his quiet steps. Dorcas moved in silence. Ellie still sat by the window, still holding her doll. But to Addie, everything had changed. The house was no longer just sad. It was dangerous. It was hiding something. And every morning when Dorcas carried that bottle upstairs, Addie felt her stomach twist. She knew she needed to see more. She needed to be sure. One evening, when the others had gone to sleep, she crept into the kitchen and reached again for the bottle. This time she opened it and poured a single drop onto a piece of cloth. The liquid left a faint, oily mark. She sniffed it again, the same bitter smell. She folded the cloth and tucked it under her apron. It wasn't much, but it was something. A clue. A piece of a growing truth. The next few days, Addie watched more closely than ever. She memorized the timing of Dorcas' steps, the way Ellie moved after taking the drops. She noticed how the girl's blinking slowed, how her head drooped slightly more than usual. The signs were small, easy to miss. But Addie didn't miss them. And now, she had something else to test. The next morning, she rose earlier than usual and went outside to the garden. Mama Roo was already awake. Addie handed her the cloth with the dried mark and explained what she had done. Mama Roo took one sniff and her face changed. She didn't say a word, just nodded slowly. Then she folded the cloth and placed it in a jar beside her herbs. That ain't no child's medicine, she said at last. That there is for quieting the nerves, for stopping the eyes. Too much of that on a child, it could blind her just the same. The truth was no longer a quiet whisper in Addie's mind. It was a shout. Miss Ellie had been given something every morning that dulled her sight. Maybe it had started as a mistake. Maybe the doctor really thought he was helping. But Addie didn't believe that anymore. Not after what Mama Roo said. Not after seeing the way Ellie reached for light. Someone had made sure she stayed in the dark. Whether Master Jeremiah knew or not, Addie didn't yet understand, but she had seen enough to know that Ellie had been robbed of something. Addie returned to the house and entered Ellie's room with a pitcher of water. The girl sat in her usual spot. Addie stood in the sunlight and let it shine over her face, watching Ellie carefully. Ellie didn't speak. She didn't move much. But her eyes blinked, and her lips parted just slightly. It was small, but it was real. Addie knew it now. She began to think of new ways to test. She used light. She used sound. She tried gentle movements, slow enough not to startle. She waved her hand in front of Ellie's face while standing in the path of sunlight. The girl's eyes twitched again. Addie dropped a ribbon on the floor and watched as Ellie's fingers shifted slightly in that direction. Day by day, her confidence grew. She wasn't imagining this. She had been right all along. Ellie was not blind, not fully. And something had kept her from seeing for years. Addie didn't speak of it to anyone else. Not yet. She wanted to be ready. She wanted to gather everything she could. Because when she did speak, it would need to be the right time. The house had ears, as Mama Roo had warned. And the wrong word in the wrong place could end everything. The silence in Willowridge was deeper now, but not empty. It was a silence full of secrets. Addie walked its halls with her eyes open wider than ever before. She saw the way the light hit the walls. She saw the way Ellie flinched after taking the drops. She saw the way Master Jeremiah looked at his daughter with both love and sorrow, never once asking questions. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he was too broken to face what might be true. But Addie wasn't broken. She had lost much, but she still had her sight. She still had her mind. And now she had a mission. A quiet one, hidden beneath chores and simple smiles. But it was there. She would not stop. She would keep watching, testing, learning. Because somewhere in that quiet house, behind the still eyes of a little girl, there was a light trying to come through. And Addie was going to find it. It was a quiet morning at Willowridge. The sky outside was pale blue, and a soft breeze moved through the tall trees. The fields were still as the first light touched the cotton rows, and inside the big house, the air felt cooler than usual. Addie had been awake before sunrise, her thoughts busy, her heart heavier than it had ever been. She had spent days testing, watching, and learning, and everything pointed to one truth: Ellie was not blind. Or at least, not completely. Something had been done to her, and Addie was now more certain than ever. She could not stop thinking about the drops, the strange bottle, the way Ellie changed after taking them. And now, with everything she had seen, she felt ready to go one step further. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had to be sure. She needed to see Ellie react in a way no one could deny. Addie waited until after breakfast. The rest of the house was busy preparing for the day, and the halls were mostly clear. She made her way upstairs with a small cloth in hand and a plan forming in her mind. Ellie was in her usual spot by the window, sitting quietly with her doll. The light outside had begun to rise stronger, casting bright patches across the wooden floor. Addie stepped carefully, letting the sunlight fall behind her as she walked in. She placed the cloth on a nearby table, but instead of going straight to her chores, she paused. The curtain beside Ellie was slightly drawn, letting in a narrow beam of light. Addie moved toward it slowly and opened it wider just enough for the beam to stretch across the room. The sunlight slid like a golden ribbon, landing gently across Ellie's face. And in that moment, something happened that made Addie freeze. Ellie blinked. It was slow, like a flower moving in the wind, but Addie saw it clearly. The girl's eyelids shut and opened again. Then her head tilted, not away from the light, but toward it. Her lips parted slightly, and her hands, which had been resting on her lap, moved up toward her chest. Addie didn't speak. She didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched. Ellie raised one hand and slowly reached into the beam of light. Her fingers spread open, and for a moment, she held her hand up as if trying to feel something that wasn't there. Then, in a voice that was soft, cracked, and unsure, Ellie whispered, "I saw the light. Mommy." The words floated into the air like feathers. Addie stood frozen, her heart pounding, her eyes wide with shock. It was the first time Ellie had spoken. The first time anyone had heard her say a word. Addie didn't know what to do. She wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but she didn't move an inch. Her eyes stayed on the girl, who now sat completely still again, her hands slowly falling back to her lap. The room was quiet. Only the sound of the wind through the trees outside broke the silence. Addie stepped back once, then again, careful not to startle her. She backed away to the doorway and stood there, pressing her fingers to her lips. Her whole body shook. The words played over and over in her mind. "I saw the light. Mommy." That voice hadn't been strong, but it had been real. Ellie had not just reacted to the light. She had understood it. She had spoken, called out for someone she had never known. Addie felt something deep inside her chest tighten. This was more than a test now. It was a cry for help. She waited a few minutes, watching Ellie from the doorway, making sure she didn't seem frightened. Ellie simply sat, her face turned slightly toward the window. There was no sign of fear, no confusion. Just stillness, like always. But now Addie knew that stillness hid something deeper. She turned and walked quickly down the stairs, her feet moving fast but light. She went to the back steps and sat down, letting the fresh morning air cool her face. Her hands trembled as she tried to breathe slowly. Everything had changed in that one moment. Ellie could see, at least enough to notice sunlight. She could speak, even if it was only a few words. And she remembered something, or someone. Addie didn't know why the word mommy came from her lips, but it meant the girl had thoughts, memories, feelings that no one had listened to for years. She had been hidden too long. Addie thought about the risks. If someone found out what she had done, she could be punished, sent back to the field, or worse. But she didn't care anymore. The secret was too big, too heavy to ignore. Ellie had been kept in darkness on purpose, and Addie had found the crack in the wall. She had to protect her now. Not just because she cared, but because no one else would. The master was too lost in grief. The doctor couldn't be trusted. The master was too lost in grief. The doctor couldn't be trusted. The others in the house were too afraid. Addie stood slowly and wiped her hands on her dress. She walked back inside, quiet and calm, but with her heart full of fire. She would not tell anyone yet. She needed time to think, to plan. But she knew one thing for sure. Ellie had seen the light, and Addie would never let that light be taken from her again. That afternoon, Addie returned to Ellie's room with a clean blanket and a basin of warm water. She acted like nothing had happened, though her eyes never left the girl's face. Ellie looked the same as always, quiet and pale, her doll resting in her arms. But Addie noticed something different now. There was a tiny softness around her mouth, like the edge of a smile. Her fingers moved a little more, her body less stiff. Addie knelt down beside her and began to clean the windowsill. As she worked, she whispered softly, "I heard you this morning, Miss Ellie. I won't tell nobody. I promise." The girl didn't answer, but her hand brushed the doll's dress, smoothing it gently. Addie smiled, just a little. She didn't expect more words, not yet. But she believed something had started to change. A door had opened, and maybe if she was careful, she could help Ellie walk through it. That night, Addie couldn't sleep. She lay in the small slave quarters, staring at the ceiling, the whisper playing in her ears. "I saw the light. Mommy." She remembered her own mother's voice, soft and warm, telling her bedtime stories. She remembered her mother's hands, always busy but always gentle. That memory made Addie sit up in bed. Ellie had never known her mother, not really. She had died giving birth. Yet somehow, the girl had said her name, had cried for her. Addie wondered if the soul could remember what the mind forgot. If something deep inside Ellie had never stopped reaching out for the one person who had loved her first. And now, that same child had reached out through the silence. Addie promised herself she would answer. She would become the hands Ellie needed, the voice Ellie could trust, even if she could never replace what was lost. The next morning, Addie went to Mama Roo early. She found her already awake, stirring something in a pot over a small fire. Addie sat beside her and told her everything: the sunlight, the blink, the whispered words. Mama Roo listened with closed eyes, nodding slowly. When Addie finished, the old woman said, "That child got a fire in her yet. You done found the match to light it. But be careful, Addie. Fire brings heat, and heat brings eyes." Addie understood. She would have to be smart. She would not confront the master. Not yet. She would not take the bottle or throw it away. Not yet. She would wait, watch, and protect. She would be the shield between Ellie and the darkness. Mama Roo handed her a cloth bundle. "Keep this by her window. It got herbs to calm the spirit, but not dull the eyes. Maybe it'll help her rest without that wicked bottle." Addie took it with both hands and thanked her. She returned to the house with a plan forming in her mind. Each day, she would bring the herbs. She would give Ellie chances to feel the sun, to follow sounds, to reach beyond what she had been taught to accept. And each day, she would gather proof. One moment at a time, one whisper at a time, until the truth could no longer be denied. The walls of Willowridge had hidden this secret for too long, but now there was a crack. And from that crack, light had entered. Ellie had seen it. Addie had heard it. And nothing would ever be the same again. Not for them. Not for the master. Not for the house that kept its silence like a cage. The whisper of light had broken the spell, and Addie was ready to fight for the girl who finally spoke from the shadows. Addie had always moved carefully inside the walls of Willowridge, but after that morning when Ellie whispered her first words, her steps carried a different weight. She no longer just served, she watched over Ellie like a quiet guardian. Each time she entered the girl's room, she brought something small to stir Ellie's senses: a bright cloth, a humming sound, or a few petals that gave off a soft smell. She never forced anything. She only gave Ellie chances. It had become a quiet pattern between them. Addie would sit nearby, pretending to dust or fold, and Ellie would move a little more than the day before. Sometimes she turned her head, sometimes her fingers followed the light. And though she hadn't spoken again since that morning, Addie could feel the change inside her. She wasn't just a quiet girl anymore. She was becoming aware, inch by inch, like sunlight slowly rising. Addie knew the danger. She understood that any wrong move could bring trouble. But the thought of Ellie being kept in darkness made the risk worth it. She couldn't ignore what she had seen. She remembered the blink, the whisper, the way Ellie's hand reached toward the light. Those moments were burned into her heart. Addie told no one else. Not Mama Roo. Not Hester. Not even the other girls in the quarters. This was a secret too precious to share. If she was caught, she would take the punishment alone. But she couldn't stop. The child deserved to know the world around her. She deserved to know she wasn't broken. Addie started planning one final test, something that would show Ellie light again, not sunlight this time, but flame. Something simple, small, but bright. If Ellie could react to fire the way she had to the sun, it would be proof no one could deny, not even the master himself. That evening, after supper, Addie slipped into the kitchen and took a small candle from the shelf. It was no longer than her finger, made from soft wax, and barely smelled of anything. She tucked it into her apron and carried it upstairs after the house settled into its usual hush. The hallway was dim. Most of the lamps had been turned down, and the moonlight barely reached through the tall windows. Addie opened the door to Ellie's room slowly. The girl was sitting by the window as usual, holding her doll and staring forward with that still, faraway look. Addie lit the candle just outside the door with a match she had hidden earlier. The flame flickered to life, soft and golden. She cupped her hand around it to keep the wind from blowing it out. Then she stepped inside. The small flame gave off just enough light to cast a gentle glow on the wall. Addie knelt beside the rug where Ellie sat and held the candle low, not too close, but near enough for the light to fall across the girl's face. Ellie blinked slowly. Her lips parted, and her body shifted forward just a little. Her eyes followed the flame's dance, soft and curious. Addie watched, barely breathing. She moved the candle slightly to the left. Ellie's head turned. Addie moved it back to the right. Ellie's eyes followed again. Addie's heart swelled. It was happening. It was real. She whispered gently, "It's just a light, Miss Ellie. Like the sun, but smaller. You see it, don't you?" And for a moment, the room felt like the safest place in the world. Quiet, warm, and full of truth. But that peace was short-lived. The door slammed open with a loud crash, and a booming voice roared through the room. "What are you doing?" Master Jeremiah stood in the doorway, his face twisted in fury, his eyes locked on Addie. He stormed into the room and snatched the candle from her hand, tossing it to the ground and stomping it out with his boot. The room went dark again, the sudden silence broken only by the sound of his heavy breathing. "You dare bring fire near my daughter? Are you trying to hurt her? What kind of foolishness is this?" he shouted. Addie couldn't speak. Her hands shook, and her knees felt weak. She opened her mouth to explain, but no words came. He stepped closer, towering over her. "I should have you whipped for this. Who gave you the right? Who told you to play games with her?" His voice was loud enough to shake the walls. Addie felt her heart pound in her chest. She tried to form a sentence, but her lips trembled. Just as the master raised his hand in rage, something unexpected happened. Ellie stood up. Her little legs moved fast, and before anyone could stop her, she ran across the room and threw her arms around Addie. The motion stunned them both. Ellie clung to Addie's waist, her body trembling. And then, in a voice loud and clear, she cried, "I saw the flame." The words hung in the air like a bell ringing across the hills. Jeremiah froze. His mouth fell open, and his raised hand dropped slowly to his side. He looked down at his daughter, then at Addie, his face pale and full of confusion. "What did she say?" he asked, but his voice was no longer angry. It was soft, unsure. Ellie looked up at him, her face full of something no one had seen in her before, awareness. "I saw the flame," she repeated, quieter now. But it was enough. Everything changed in that moment. Jeremiah stepped back, shaking his head. He looked at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time. He dropped into the chair by the wall and put his head in his hands. Addie remained still, her arms gently holding Ellie. The girl didn't let go. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then Jeremiah whispered. She spoke. She moved. She saw. The words sounded like they hurt to say. Addie didn't answer. She couldn't find the right words. Ellie slowly let go of her and sat beside her on the floor, her hand resting against Addie's leg. The master looked up again, his eyes red. "How long have you known? How long has she been able to do this?" Addie swallowed. Her voice was soft. "Not long. Just a few days. I wasn't sure. I just wanted to help her see, sir. I never meant harm." Jeremiah stood slowly and walked toward the window. He pulled the curtain back and let the moonlight spill into the room. His face looked different now, not hard, not angry. Just tired. Worn down by years of sorrow. "All this time," he muttered, "I believed she was blind. I believed the doctor. I believed there was nothing to be done." He turned back toward Addie. "And now you tell me she can see." Addie didn't move. She only said, "She sees light, sir. And she follows it. She knew the candle. She knew the sun. I don't know how much, but she sees something. I swear it." Jeremiah walked slowly across the room and knelt beside his daughter. He reached out a hand, gently touched her hair. "Ellie," he whispered, "can you see me?" The child tilted her head but didn't speak. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had seen in years. The master stood again and looked at Addie. His voice was quieter now, filled with something like regret. "I don't know what to say, or what to do. But I know this, I can't keep giving her those drops until we find out the truth." Addie nodded. Her hands were still shaking, but she felt relief begin to rise inside her. Jeremiah picked up the broken candle from the floor, staring at it for a moment before setting it on the table. "Go," he said softly. "Take her to bed. We'll speak in the morning." Addie helped Ellie lie down and pulled the blanket over her gently. The girl looked calmer than ever before, her hands resting quietly on her chest. As Addie turned to leave, she glanced once more at the master. He stood by the window, staring out into the night. Something in his face had changed. A crack in the wall had finally opened. Addie left the room and closed the door softly behind her. Her legs felt weak, but her spirit had never been stronger. She had stood her ground. She had protected the girl. And now, someone else knew the truth. The master's world had shifted. He had seen the flame in his daughter's eyes, and it had burned away the lie he had lived with for years. Addie returned to the slave quarters that night with her heart full. She didn't speak a word to anyone. She lay on her bed and stared at the stars through the cracks in the wall, knowing that she had done something brave. Something that might change everything. Ellie had spoken. She had moved. She had seen. And Addie had been there to witness it all. No matter what came next, that truth could not be hidden again. Not by fear. Not by silence. Not even by power. The next morning came with heavy clouds hanging low in the sky, as if the world itself knew change was in the air. Inside Willowridge, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Addie moved through her chores like always, but her eyes stayed sharp, and her ears listened for every footstep, every whisper. She hadn't seen Master Jeremiah since the night before, when Ellie had cried out, "I saw the flame." She didn't know what he was thinking or what he would do next. All she knew was that something inside him had cracked open. He had looked at his daughter differently. He had listened. Now, Addie needed to act before anyone could stop the truth from coming out. She had to find the bottle, the one Dorcas gave Ellie each morning. If she could prove what was inside it, maybe the master would finally see the full truth. Addie waited until the kitchen was empty. The others had gone to prepare laundry outside, and Dorcas had stepped out to gather eggs. Moving quickly, Addie climbed onto a stool and reached for the top shelf. Her fingers felt around the sacks of flour and jars until they touched the small bottle wrapped in an old cloth. She pulled it down gently and unwrapped it. The brown glass shimmered faintly in the light. There was no label, no name, just a scratch across the side. But this was it. The same bottle Dorcas carried upstairs each morning. Addie held it to the light and tilted it slowly. The liquid inside moved like oil, thick, slow, dark. Her heart pounded as she wrapped it back up and tucked it into her apron. She looked around one more time, then slipped out the back door and hurried across the yard toward Mama Rue's garden. She found the old woman near the herb beds, pulling weeds with her hands in the dirt. "Mama Rue," Addie called softly. The woman turned, saw her face, and stood up slowly. Without speaking, Addie pulled the bottle from her apron and handed it over. Mama Rue took it with care and turned it in her hands. She sniffed the top, then dipped a small wooden stick into the mouth and dabbed the liquid onto her fingers. Her face changed. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed tight. "You found this where?" she asked. "In the kitchen," Addie said. "It's what they give Miss Ellie every morning. I saw Dorcas take it upstairs, day after day." Mama Rue nodded grimly. "I know this smell. Belladonna. That's what this is. They used to call it deadly nightshade. Too much of it will kill a man. But in small drops, it clouds the eyes, blurs the world. makes light into shadow. Addie felt her knees grow weak. She sat on the grass, her hands shaking. So it's true. She wasn't blind by birth. This made her that way. Mama Roo nodded again. Yes, child. I seen it used before. Years ago, by folks who wanted to calm nerves or hide madness. But on a child? It keeps the world dim. If she got those drops all her life, her eyes never stood a chance. She may still have some sight left, but it's been dulled on purpose. Tears filled Addie's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. Why would the doctor do that? Why would anyone want to keep her blind? Mama Roo looked away, her voice low. Some folks trust doctors too much. Some can't face the truth. That man, Dr. Whitaker, he'd been in and out of this house since the day Ellie was born. Maybe he wanted to keep his job. Maybe he thought he was doing what's right. Or maybe he liked having control. But whatever his reason, he's the one who did this. And it's time the master hears it. Addie nodded slowly. She had feared many things since arriving at Willowridge, but now she felt something stronger than fear, a need for justice. She had seen too much, heard too much. She couldn't stay quiet anymore. Will you come with me? She asked Mama Roo. He might not believe me alone. Mama Roo placed a hand on her shoulder. I'll go. This house done lived in shadow too long. It's time for light to come in. Together, they walked toward the house, bottle in hand, and truth heavy in their steps. Master Jeremiah was in the study, sitting behind his desk. His face looked tired, older than before, as if one night had added years to his eyes. He looked up when they entered. What is it? He asked, his voice guarded. Addie stepped forward and placed the bottle on the desk. This is what Miss Ellie's been given every day. It's not medicine, sir. It's belladonna. It's been keeping her blind. Jeremiah stared at the bottle, then at Addie, then at Mama Roo. The old woman nodded. I seen this before. I smelled it myself. That doctor you trusted, he been giving your girl poison. Not healing. Harming. Jeremiah picked up the bottle slowly, turning it in his hands. He opened the top, sniffed it, then frowned. This is what Dr. Whitaker said would keep her calm. Said her nerves needed soothing. She didn't need soothing, Addie said. She needed someone to believe she could see. And when she stopped getting the drops, she did. I saw her. You saw her. Jeremiah sat back, the weight of the truth settling on him like a stone. All these years. I thought she was broken. I blamed fate. I never questioned it. And I let that man come in here, month after month. I let him do this to her. His voice cracked. Mama Roo stepped forward. You trusted him. That was your mistake. But you can fix it now. Jeremiah looked at her, then at Addie. How? What do I do? Addie took a deep breath. No more drops. No more doctor. Let her heal, however she can. Let her see the light. I'll help her. I'll keep watch. Jeremiah stared at her, then nodded slowly. You'll have it. Starting today, no one gives her anything unless I say so. And I want that doctor back here. I want answers. Mama Roo raised her chin. Be ready. He won't like being questioned. Jeremiah stood. I don't care. I've lived in a lie too long. It ends now. As Addie and Mama Roo left the room, the bottle stayed behind on the master's desk. No longer hidden, no longer a secret. The truth had come into the light at last. And in that moment, the halls of Willowridge felt less heavy, less dark. A long lie had been broken, and the fight to bring Ellie back to the world had truly begun. Days passed without the drops, and something in Ellie began to change. It wasn't sudden like lightning, but slow and steady like the rising sun. She no longer sat so still all day. Her eyes blinked more, and she turned her head when someone entered the room. At first, Addie thought it might be her imagination. But then Ellie began following the sound of Addie's footsteps. She moved her fingers along the edge of the chair with purpose. And once she turned toward the window and whispered, "The sky is blue." Addie froze in place when she heard it. She didn't say anything back, only smiled and went on with her cleaning, but inside her heart was bursting. Each day brought something new, a word, a smile, a small reaction to light. The child who had once been locked in silence was opening her eyes to the world. The house began to feel different because of it. Master Jeremiah watched the change with quiet eyes. He didn't say much, but he noticed everything. He started spending more time near his daughter, sitting in the room while she played or standing near the doorway just to listen. He didn't bring up the doctor at first. He didn't speak of the past. But Addie could see the guilt written on his face. Still, something else lived there too, hope. The more Ellie changed, the more Jeremiah softened. One morning, he came to the kitchen and asked Addie, "What does she need?" She looked up from the table, surprised. "More light, sir. More color. Maybe paper, something to touch. Things that help her learn." He nodded and left without another word. But that afternoon, he returned with a small stack of paper and some old pencils from his office. He placed them in Ellie's room and said nothing. But Addie noticed the corners of his mouth twitch, almost like a smile. Addie became more than just a maid in those days. She became a teacher in secret, a friend in silence. She would sit near Ellie and draw shapes on the paper, a sun, a flower, a tree. She said each name aloud, gently and clearly. At first, Ellie didn't react. But slowly, she began to repeat the words. Her voice was quiet, but sure. Sunday tree. Sky. Addie felt joy each time she heard it. She used bright cloths to teach colors, holding them up to the light and saying, red, blue, yellow. Ellie blinked and sometimes smiled. Once she touched the yellow cloth and said, bright. Addie squeezed her hand. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Addie knew she was still a slave, and Jeremiah was still the master, but something had changed. They shared something now, a secret truth that bound them beyond their stations. The silence that once ruled Willowridge was fading. As Ellie learned, the whole house seemed to shift. The other slaves noticed it too. The halls were quieter, but not in a fearful way. More peaceful. Hester began to hum again as she cleaned. Even Dorcas, who had once carried the drops upstairs without question, now looked away when she saw Addie, shame on her face. No one spoke openly about what had happened, but they all felt the difference. The weight that had hung over Willowridge for years was lifting. Ellie laughed for the first time one afternoon while playing with a strip of ribbon. The sound echoed through the house like a bell, and people stopped to listen. A field hand paused with his hoe in the dirt. A kitchen girl spilled water on the floor and forgot to wipe it up. They had all heard the stories. Now they were seeing it themselves. The blind girl who was not blind after all. Jeremiah started joining Addie and Ellie for short moments in the evening. He would stand near the doorway, arms crossed, watching as Ellie traced shapes with her fingers or pointed at the colors on the cloths. One day, he brought in a worn picture book that had belonged to his wife. He placed it on the table beside Ellie and said, "She used to read this to me." Addie opened the first page and pointed to the drawings. Ellie leaned close, her eyes blinking fast, trying to focus. She traced the drawings with her finger. Jeremiah sat down then, slowly, and said, "That one's a horse, sweetheart." Ellie said, "Horse." His hand trembled. He looked at Addie, eyes wet, but said nothing more. That evening, he lit the lamp in her room himself, letting the glow fall softly over her face. Willowridge, once filled with ghosts, was now slowly filling with light and life again. But there was still one thing left undone. Jeremiah had sent for Dr. Whitaker a week earlier, demanding he return. When the man arrived, smiling and confident as always, Jeremiah did not meet him alone. Mama Rue and Addie were there, standing by the parlor wall while the master held the now empty bottle in his hand. "What exactly have you been giving my daughter?" Jeremiah asked flatly. Dr. Whitaker blinked, clearly unprepared for the tone. "Why, the same calming solution as always. To ease her nerves, of course." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "It was belladonna," he said. "Poison. And I have witnesses. 2 who smelled it, tested it, and saw the effects fade when it stopped." The doctor tried to talk, but Jeremiah cut him off. "You will answer to the court." And he did. Within days, the sheriff came. A trial followed weeks later. Witnesses told what they saw. Evidence was clear. Dr. Whitaker was sentenced and taken away. Jeremiah returned home from court in silence. That evening, he sat with Addie and Ellie under the front porch awning as a soft rain fell. "He won't hurt anyone again," he said. Addie nodded. Ellie rested her head on Addie's shoulder, humming softly. The man who once controlled her world was gone. The lie was gone. And in its place, a kind of peace had settled over Willowridge. The final chain had been broken. A house once filled with secrets had finally spoken the truth. And the girl, once kept in darkness, was free to see the world, with open eyes and an open heart. The morning was quiet at Willowridge. Dew rested gently on the leaves, and the sky wore a soft golden hue. Ellie sat by the open window, a clean sheet of paper before her and a few dull-colored pencils laid neatly beside it. Addie had brought them early, smiling as she placed the tools in front of her. The day before, Ellie had said, "I want to make something." It was the first time she had asked for anything beyond water or play. Addie knew what it meant. The world was no longer something happening around Ellie. It was something she now wanted to take part in. The little girl lifted the yellow pencil and pressed it gently to the paper. Her hand moved slowly, like she was unsure. But with Addie beside her, she drew a circle. Then, little lines all around it. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Son." Addie felt a warmth rise inside her chest. She leaned closer to look. The drawing was simple, a big round shape with rays stretching outward. But to Addie, it was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. Ellie had seen the sun. Not just felt it or heard about it. She had seen it with her own eyes and now drawn it with her own hands. Addie picked up the picture and held it to the light. "It's beautiful, Miss Ellie," she said softly. Ellie smiled, the kind of smile that made her cheeks rise and her eyes squint just a little. That morning, Addie pinned the picture on the wall beside Ellie's window. The yellow circle shone bright against the pale wood. When Master Jeremiah walked in and saw it, he paused. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "She's remembering." Later that day, Addie found Jeremiah sitting alone in the study, a stack of old papers spread before him. His brow was furrowed, his fingers tracing a faded page. Addie waited in the doorway until he looked up. "Did you know," he said slowly, "that Ellie's mother, my wife, never wanted the doctor here?" Addie stepped inside. "No, sir." He nodded. She didn't trust him. Said he treated everything like a problem to fix, not a person to care for. But after she passed, I didn't know what else to do. I let him take charge of Ellie's care. I thought he was helping. But the more I look at these notes, the more questions I have. He lifted a letter. "This is from her midwife. It says my wife was awake after the birth. Long enough to whisper something. But I was told she died right away." His voice grew tight. Someone lied. Addie stepped closer. "What do you think happened, sir?" Jeremiah stared at the letter, then at the candle burning beside him. "I think she saw something. Maybe she knew Ellie wasn't blind at all. Maybe she said something the doctor didn't want me to hear. And maybe she died because of it." Addie felt the air in the room grow heavy. A deeper truth had begun to stir. The blindness had been a lie, But perhaps the roots of that lie went deeper than anyone wanted to believe. Jeremiah stood and walked to the window. I let a stranger decide what was best for my child. And now I wonder if that mistake cost me more than I ever knew. Addie didn't speak. She stood still, listening, letting the silence speak for both of them. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. In the days that followed, Jeremiah no longer waited to be part of Ellie's world. He became active in her learning. He brought books, sat beside her as she drew, and even walked with her in the garden. Addie was always nearby, guiding quietly, but the weight of care now rested on the father who had once hidden in shadows. He asked questions. He smiled more. He even laughed once when Ellie pointed at a flower and said, "Purple," with such excitement that the birds startled from the hedges. The house continued to change. The walls, once thick with silence, now echoed with small sounds of joy. A girl speaking. A father answering. A friend humming softly as she folded linens by the window. Hope, slow and gentle, had become part of the air. One morning, Addie and Ellie sat under a large willow tree near the edge of the garden. It had become their favorite spot. The sun filtered through the long branches, leaving golden stripes on the grass. Ellie had a fresh piece of paper and the yellow pencil. She was drawing again, another sun, this one with a smiling face. Addie watched quietly until Ellie stopped and said, "Do you think Mommy sees this?" Addie smiled gently. "I think she sees everything now." Ellie nodded, content with that answer. After a moment of silence, she looked at the light around them and said something that made Addie freeze. "I was never blind," Ellie whispered. "Just told to be." The words were soft but full of truth. Addie looked at her, eyes wide. She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Ellie smiled. "You showed me." Tears stung Addie's eyes. She reached out and took Ellie's hand. "You showed yourself," she said. "I just helped you see it." The two of them sat quietly after that, listening to the breeze. The sun rose higher in the sky. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The pain, the lies, the fear, they had all led to this one truth. Ellie had found her sight. Her voice. Her place in the world. And Addie had helped guide her there. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. Everything had already been said. The yellow sun on the page danced in the light, bright and bold, just like the girl who had drawn it. Behind them, the house stood tall, no longer heavy with sorrow, but alive with something new. That afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, Jeremiah joined them beneath the willow tree. He didn't bring papers or questions. He just sat down beside them and looked at the picture. He smiled, then looked at Addie. "He's gone now," he said. "The court did its part. The doctor won't be coming back." There was no anger in his voice, just relief. Ellie leaned against Addie and looked up at the sky. The wind blew gently, and a bird sang in the distance. "It feels different," she whispered. Addie nodded. "It is." And in that quiet moment, the world around them felt open and wide. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. A truth had been buried, but now it stood in sunlight. Ellie, the girl once thought blind, had seen what others chose not to. And beside her, the one who believed in her from the start sat proud, quiet, and free. And so it was that the girl once thought blind became the girl who saw. Not just the sun, or colors, or faces, but the truth of her own worth. And the girl once called a servant became the one who helped another find freedom, even in a world that had none to give. Willowridge would never be the same. It had been a place of silence, then of sorrow, and now, at last, of sunlight. A new story had begun, and it started with a whisper, a picture, and the words that would never be forgotten. "I was never blind, just told to be."